So welcome back to our journey through the book of Proverbs. This week we're going to be looking at chapter 7 in Mishle and ask the question that is guiding all of our study together: where can wisdom be found? And we're going to look through this very interesting chapter. It has a lot of themes that, for those of us that are familiar with Proverbs or have read this chapter before, that are recurring throughout the book, but I'd like us to pay attention to the ways in which perhaps some of these themes are being redrawn or represented. And always when there's a repetition in scripture, we've spoken about this before together, but just to remind you that it is a strategy. Repetition is a strategy specifically within the Hebrew Bible that's called, according to Robert Alter, a structure of intensity. And so the way in which things are repeated and the places in which they're repeated is always considered to be a clue as to what the program is and of the author, and specifically here of the authorship of the book of Proverbs. We have been talking together about the possibility that this is indeed a curriculum for wisdom. So let's give that some thought together and try to appreciate what might be operating here in terms of the agenda, as well as in terms of the overall program itself. And we'll keep our eyes open specifically for the ways in which wisdom is symbolized. Okay, so what I'd like to do, I have it up on the screen share. Just give me a thumbs up if everybody is able to see it. You're able to see it? Great. Okay, so you already have a copy as well, but I'd like to have it on the screen, so for those that are going to be joining us later at another time, you also are able to access the material. So we're going to go around the Zoom room, as is our custom, and we're going to read, everyone will read 5 verses, and we'll do it in the Hebrew and the English so we can appreciate the poetry and the sounds of the words that are also forms of these structures of intensity that Alter refers to in the Bible. Okay, so start with Bev and with Morton, and then I'll go around the circle together. Everyone will take 5 verses and join me if you wish. Chapter 7, Mishle. B'ni shmor amarai u'mitzvotai titzbon itach.
My child, take my sayings to heart and store up my commandments within you.
Shmor mitzvotai v'chiyeh.
Keep my commands and live, my teaching like the apple of your eye.
Asherem al etzbaotaich katvem al luach libecha.
Bind them upon your fingers, write them upon the table of your heart.
Emor lechochma achotiat umoda labina tikra.
Say unto wisdom, you are my sister, and call discernment a friend.
Lishmorcha meisha zara minochria amareha hechelika.
To keep you from an adulteress, from the smooth-talking stranger woman.
Great. Morton. Ki bechalon beiti ba'ad eshnabi nishkafti.
For from the window of my house I looked forth through my lattice.
Va'era baptaim avina bavanim na'ar chaser lev.
And I beheld among the dupes, discerned among the youths, a witless lad.
Over bashuk etzel pina v'derech beita yitzad.
Passing through the street near her corner, on the way he strides to her house.
Beneshef be'erev yom be'ishon laila va'afela.
At twilight, as eve descends in the pitch black night and darkness.
V'hinei isha likrato shitzona unsturat lev.
And behold, a woman to meet up with him, attired as a harlot and wily of heart.
Wonderful. Shirley, 11. Homiyah hi v'soraret ba'veita lo yishkenu ragleha.
She is riotous and rebellious. Her feet abide not in her house.
Pam b'chutz, pam b'rechovot, v'etzel kol pina te'erov.
Now outside, now in the city square, and she lurks by every corner.
והחזיקה בו ונשקה לו, העזה פניה ותאמר לו.
So she seizes and kisses him with an impudent face, saying unto him,
זבחי שלמים עלי היום שילמתי נדרי.
I had to make peace offerings this day, have I paid my vows.
על כן יצאתי לקראתך, לשחרר פניך ואמצעך.
So I've come forth to meet you, to seek you out, and I found thee.
Great. Goldie, 16, מרבידים עבדתי ארסי, חטובות אתון מצרים.
With coverlets decked on my couch, with striped cloths of Egyptian linen.
נפתי משכבי מור אוהלים וקינמון.
I've perfumed my bed with myrrh also, aloes and cinnamon.
לך נרווה דודים עד בוקר נתעלסה באהבים.
Come, let us drink deep of loving until the morn. Let us revel ourselves with love's delight.
כי אין האיש בביתו, הלך בדרך מרחוק.
For my husband is not at home, he's gone on a faraway journey.
צרור הכסף לקח בידו ליום הכסה, בבוא ביתו.
He has taken the purse of silver with him. At the new moon shall he return.
Wonderful. Alan, 21. היטטו ברוב לקחה, בחלק שפתיה תדיחנו.
With all her smooth talk, she sways him. With the blandishment of her lips, she entices him astray.
הולך אחריה פתאום, כשור אל טבח יבוא, וכאחס על מוסר אבל.
He goes after her straight away, as an ox that goes to the slaughter, or as one in fetters to the correction of the fool.
עד יפלה חץ כבדו כמהר ציפור אל פח, ולא ידע כי בנפשו הוא.
Till an arrow pierces his innards, as a bird hastens to the snare, unknowing it is at the cost of his life.
ועתה בנים שימו לי והקשיבו לאמרי פי.
Now, therefore, O children, hearken unto me and attend to my wisdom sayings.
אל יש אל דרכיה ליבך, אל תטע בנתיבותיה.
Let not your heart veer to her paths, and do not go astray upon her paths.
Great. Okay. Elisa, do you want to take the last verses here? כי רבים חללים הפילה ועצומים כל הרוגיה. Okay. Arthur, can you see it?
Yeah, for many
26 and
victims,
27?
for many victims has she felled, mighty hosts are all her slain.
דרכי שאול ביתה יורדות אל חדרי מוות.
The pathways of her habitat lead to the netherworld, going down to the chambers of death.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, everyone. So those are 27 strange verses from the 7th chapter. And what I'd like to do now together is to go through, if you have some things that you notice, whether this is the first or the 10th reading of it, it's always interesting to see it in a new light. And let's take questions and observations, and then I'll share with you some things that that I've noticed as well in rereading this section within the larger arc of the narrative of the curriculum. So any questions, observations, or points of clarification? Lisa, and then Shirley? No, sorry, then Goldie, I see. Yeah.
She's muted. Oh, there.
Hi, everybody. So in verse 3, I'm curious about the phrase "upon the table of my heart." I don't have it right in front of me. I hope that I'm quoting it correctly.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other similar phrases in other areas in other books or of Jewish literature that we would know about? Because just the combination of the table and the heart, and is is the word shulchan, is it really table or is it altar?
No. Yeah, it's a good point. That's the translation. It's not a table per se, but maybe it might be more accurate. That was something that I saw in one of the translations, but it might be more helpful to call it a tablet. It's a luach as opposed to a shulchan. So it may be better and more accurate to call it a tablet of your heart, a luach.
Isn't a luach like a blackboard?
It can be a blackboard, but it's also that's modern Hebrew. But a luach here would be probably more like a tablet in its ancient setting. So it's probably better as a
Is it the
tablet.
same word that they use for the tablets in the Bible?
Yeah, the luchot are called tablets.
Yeah, Chut Debris.
Yeah,
So
luchot abrit.
how do we understand that?
What do you see in it?
Well, like there's a similar line, isn't there, in the Shema about inscribing something in your heart?
Mhm.
But we don't use the word luach. We don't reference the tablets.
Mhm. Well, let's give it some more thought.
And I wonder if could you say that the tablets were in this case are considered like divinely given, so that the capacity is already divinely integrated into every human being?
I don't think these are divine. I think it's the same word, but it's a different usage. So if you were to look back into the book of Exodus, for example, and the description of the tablets in Exodus 34, the description there is that God says to Moses in 34:1 that you should carve 2 tablets of stone, shnei luchot avanim, like the first, and I'll inscribe upon the tablets the words that were on the first tablets that you shattered. So the luchot there are clearly meant to be divine. And I'm sure that the wisdom teacher knows that this is the relationship of associations between God and Moses is the wisdom teacher to the people. But there does not seem to me in Proverbs per se, aside from the association of the word and the fact that there's wisdom, that this is a divine mandate. It seems to be something that's coming from a teacher, not from God.
When you were talking, it made me think about the fact that if you're going to use the word, and there is an allusion, whether intended or not, back to the tablets in Genesis, once you recall that they were initially broken, it reminds me of that Hasidic teaching that you like about there's nothing more whole than a broken heart.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be interesting, Bash, to combine that with what's going on here in terms of achieving shleimut. The road to shleimut is through wisdom.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay. Thank you.
To just follow up on with this verse is
We're still on verse 3. Okay.
yes, Rebecca is figurative, we assume, but it actually could be literal. But if it's figurative, it has a different meaning than if it's literal.
And what do you see the difference?
Well, if it's literal, I mean, hearts. At the time, I believe the mind was associated with the heart rather than with the brain.
Correct.
So it would be knowing. But if it's literal, at least, I mean, if it's figurative, the way we figuratively think of the heart, we think of it as being important to us. You know, I love you from the bottom of my heart
Mm-hmm.
is an expression that tells you that something is very, very important. So I have no way of knowing how it was meant at the time, though.
Well, I think it's a good way of trying to come to terms with it is to look at it within the context of the rest of the verses, right? So the sense that this is something that's important is actually part of what the teacher is trying to instill within the student. And maybe there is an analogy to what Elisa was saying earlier as I'm thinking about it, to, not to say that this is divine, but in the same way that God is the master teacher to Moses, and Moses becomes a master teacher to the Israelites, in this way too, wisdom is being taught by a master teacher to a disciple. So the analogy is there. And the purpose of saying this, it's interesting that the Luchot, which are described both in the book of Exodus as well as in the book of Deuteronomy, if you look at the way that the process of wisdom is transmitted, it's a process of revelation that is communal, right? First, it's revealed to Moshe, but then Moshe has to reveal it to the community. And there's a great sense of fear and trembling and anxiety and uncertainty when the Israelites receive the Torah. And that's the reason why Moses is, in a sense, deployed or volunteered on behalf of the people, because the people themselves are terrified by the pyrotechnics of revelation in the book of Exodus, right? And then Moses, of course, is angered at the people, and so the tablets are smashed. It's a very problematic process of transmission. So I wouldn't want to take the analogy too far. And maybe that's the reason why that in Proverbs there isn't a lot of direct evocation aside from this word luach to the Exodus narrative, because on a certain level, if you look at it, one might wonder whether or not that was an effective moment of the transmission of wisdom. Because if there were two sets of tablets that had to be revealed to the people on a level of sort of the pristine transmission of knowledge and of illumination and of gnosis, which tablet would you have preferred to have received? The first or the second? See what I'm suggesting is that there was something about that first tablet, those first tablets that were revealed to Moses, that remains shrouded in mystery. Why is it that the wisdom on those tablets ultimately were not able to be transmitted to the people? We have a series of reasons why we'll explain, right? When if you were to try to teach that story to people, or to look at it yourself as an adult, or if you're teaching it to children, what's the reason we say that the first set of tablets were smashed?
The golden calf.
Right, because of idolatry. So when Moses sees the people who are his disciples and his children, right? It's that there is the analogy here, now thinking about what Elisa said, that in the same way that the wisdom teacher is speaking to the disciple as a child, or my children, Moses speaks to the people as children. Moses, as the teacher, sees the children engaged in idolatry and says, you're not ready to receive this wisdom, smashes the tablets, goes back up, gets a 2.0 version. But the 2.0 version is different. It is, in a sense, it's a step down version, both as a reflection of Moses's anger, as well as the fact that the people weren't able to receive the wisdom on that level that he was transmitting it. They weren't ready, and some of the commentators suggest that he wasn't ready. But it's interesting, the sages say in that on that verse that when the rewriting of the tablets takes place, and Exodus 34:1, carve the two tablets of stone like the first, and I will inscribe upon the tablets the words that were on the first tablets, which you shattered, asher shibarta. The early rabbinic exegesis on that says that God speaks to Moses afterwards, after having said asher shibarta, those tablets that you shattered. And you would think that a master teacher would then say to the student, who then is supposed to become the teacher, why did you smash the tablets? That really was not helpful. We don't have a printing press. Now we have to go and carve two new blank stones, and we have to go. It's like, it's unbelievable. This is like, how could you be so inconsiderate? It's going to take forever to transmit this again. The rabbis say instead, actually, God speaks to Moses and says, Yasher kochecha asher shibarta, right? So it takes that verse and places it into a dialogue between the master, the ultimate teacher of wisdom, God, to Moses, and the ultimate teacher, says to the student, "Good work that you smashed the tablets. It was appropriate that you smash these tablets because this is a religion and this is a religious gnosis and truth that is all about iconoclasm. After all, I didn't necessarily give these tablets to Abraham, but what did Abraham do according to the exegesis? When he was told,
He's-
remember, Morton, the story, to
Yeah,
watch his father's idols
he
chopped?
smashed the idols of his father.
Right. So those may have been, you had a Freudian slip there and you said he smashed the tablets of, and he said, I mean, the idols of his father. But it's interesting to think about how in antiquity, those idols may have been in that culture, the tablets of wisdom for those people at that time. And monotheism comes along and tries to create, by the time we reach Moses, to create a religious community that needs to be ready to receive the wisdom. The truth is that we look back at Abraham's lineage and we look back at Terach and we say, well, he was an idol worshiper. And what distinguishes Abraham and Sarah from their environment of Ur of the Chaldees, which was a very advanced culture that had its own wisdom, they had to break from that culture to make a radical break, to move from the place of polytheism to the place of monotheism. And it's a slow evolution, so that by the time we fast forward to Moses and then we fast forward to Proverbs later on, Moses is still dealing with a lot of the same patterns of behavior of idolatry that Abraham was dealing with. Abraham had to break from Ur of the Chaldees to create Judaism. Moses is trying to now shift from the first family that Abraham and Sarah create, which becomes the first Jewish family, along with perhaps some of the first converts to Judaism, as according to some of the rabbinic interpretation. But after that first family completes its journey and Judaism is a possibility, then Moses tries to create a people, a nation, a community. And then from there, if we fast forward, these are just different paradigms of wisdom transmission. Now you have wisdom schools that are emerging, and Proverbs is a curriculum to try to inculcate wisdom within those who are ready and who are seeking, right? The project that Moses has is one about building community, but it's not entirely clear the exact audience of Proverbs. Is this meant to be a curriculum for building community, or is it the curriculum for a wisdom school? We said, remember, in the ancient Near East, that part of the surrounding environment was one that relied upon the transmission of wisdom within the tribe. So there is a need for family stability that leads to communal stability, as well as tribal stability when wisdom is transmitted. And it's a very interesting thing for us to think about exactly the audience for which this curriculum has been created. So there's some interesting things for us to think about that we may not have considered at the first reading of this. Bev, and then I think Goldie had a comment.
Goldie, I think you have been waiting, so you go
Oh,
first.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. It's okay. To me, chapter 7, it just seems to be a continuation of these dire warnings against the seduction of the adulteresses, and which also could represent attraction to idolatry of the other tribes. There's a great anxiety here. But what I was thinking is with all these warnings to the young people that they're so afraid will stray, it seems they don't think that the young people have any willpower to not to accept this. It's like they're taking it for granted that this is the way young people will see this and make the wrong choices.
Well, given the context of what we just talked about in terms of our track record as a people in our spiritual history, do you really fault the teacher for having suspicions about whether or not the people are up to the task? Right? We are an idolatrous people that is supposed to become loyal, and we're constantly throughout the Hebrew Bible falling into idolatrous patterns of practice, and also idolatrous ways of thinking. And I think that's an important distinction to make, though, in terms of the transition from the earlier texts in the Hebrew Bible to these later strand in the wisdom teachings. They're less concerned with someone, like, for example, in the book of Deuteronomy or later in the prophets, where there's an anxiety about the people going and whoring after other gods. It's the language that's used in Deuteronomy and in the Shema, because the cult of Astarte and some of the other feminine wisdom cults that were part of the ancient Near East, that was a real attraction. It was competition in the marketplace of spiritual possibilities in the ancient Near East that really disturbed many of the teachings that we see and the directions of building community in the book of Deuteronomy, as well as in the prophets. By the time we reach the wisdom teachings, and we've talked about the context as well, that we're speculating in which these teachings were primarily transmitted, there's a shift in terms of culture from an agrarian society where fertility cults would have been the attraction, because you were worried about the ability to be, you went to go worship in these cultic forms and the fertility cults that were the symbol of which and the focus of which were Astarte and the other goddesses, because you wanted to have a fecund crop. But the shift from agrarian society to a market culture of economy that no longer is focusing on for fertility concerns is because it's no longer about my crop. Now it's about my stock and trade, right? What is it that I'm trading in the marketplace? The fact that there's taxation, the fact that there is money. We talked about this under this period in the Persian Empire. There is a whole shift of anxiety from the field to the marketplace. And so the mind may shift in terms of how it's being distracted. And the vehicle for distraction now moves from the field to the marketplace. I think that is something that is different about what's going on here in terms of the anxiety, even though the symbol shifts, it remains the feminine, right? So what was a point of distraction for the agrarian mind continues to be a point of distraction in terms of the way that it's the symbol that's used now in a culture that is based on commerce. And the issue is how can you be wise and focus on woman wisdom as opposed to being distracted by the strange woman or the adulteress. So that's definitely an ongoing concern. That anxiety about being distracted is there, and deviance now is really more about a threat to social order. And in many ways, that is a function of an economy that has shifted from concern about crops, which is really a life and death concern, because if I don't have a fecund and fertile season, I'm finished. My family is over, and my continuity of the legacy of my lineage is over. But in the vagaries of a market economy, one day I'm a rich man, the next day I'm broke and poor, right? So those things can shift even within an agrarian season. You could become rich and poor, many times over. And so the threat and the anxiety about that wisdom is something that is a constant concern. So it is interesting for us to think about that, and to think about the place of the private domain, the public domain, and specifically the marketplace and the home. Usually, and if we look at this in chapter 7 as well as some of the other chapters, where is the place that the feminine resides? She's not in the field anymore, right? Where is she?
She's in the shuk.
That's right. That's right. So she is all over the market and in the public square, and that's something that that is the site of this new anxiety, and that's something that's important to remember, right? That wherever you go within the shuk, we spoke about that as the marketplace, but it's really the place of trading your wares, and it's the place where money is exchanged, and also where ideas are exchanged, right? It's not just the marketplace of commerce, but it's the marketplace of ideas which are extremely important, as well as anxiety provoking. Because in the past, you may have been drawn to a fertility cult. Now you can be drawn away to a different wisdom cult. And remember, we've spoken about this before, the ancient Greek mystery cults and the search for Sophia, which is the root of the word philosophy, which means the love of Sophia, which means knowledge. Sophia was portrayed in the ancient Greek mystery cults as a feminine figure, which primarily, but not only, but primarily young men and lads would go after, and also married men would go after, and they would abandon their families in search of Sophia. So here, what is the name that's given to wisdom that we're encountering here? How is she referred to? She's referred to in verse 4 as Chochma and Bina. And then in verse 5, be careful of the Isha Zara and the Nochriya. So it's actually interesting how structured this this polemic is, and the way that it follows a lot of what we see in other biblical patterns of parallelism, right? In verse 4a and b, you have Chochma and Bina, you have wisdom and discernment. And in 5a and 5b, you have the adulteress and the stranger woman. So you have a thing and its opposite, a thing and its opposite. And the seeker of wisdom needs to understand that there is actually an interrelationship between Chochma and Bina. Okay, later on in Jewish mysticism, those become spheres of divine consciousness that the adept attempts to cultivate here, and they take on masculine and feminine valences in medieval Kabbalah. Here, it's interesting that the teacher is saying Chochma and Bina. If you look at the Hebrew, they both end with the letter He, which means they're feminine. And there's no distinction in chapter 7 between the masculine and the feminine. Here, the process of knowing through wisdom and discernment, they're both feminine symbols. That changes later on in the medieval period, where Chochma becomes masculine, even though the word is not a masculine word, and Bina becomes feminine. And it reflects what we saw earlier on in Proverbs, where we talk about the distinction between Musar Avicha and Torat Imecha. Do you remember earlier on we saw that it's a warning? Make sure that you follow the Musar of the father and the Torah of the mother. So we would have expected, if that kind of binary thinking was consistent and important enough as being a gossamer thread throughout the entire curriculum, that here, when we get to Chochma and Bina, that Chochma should have been the father, and Bina then would have been the mother, or it could have been reversed. But there should have been a distinction. And this is what's so interesting about Proverbs is that there is a real concern for the feminine. And that's because of the focus of the symbolic pull that the feminine has within ancient Near Eastern culture. Again, it shifts in the medieval period, and that's a whole other discussion for another time and place. But we're trying to understand the pshat. What is the literal contextual meaning of these verses in the context of Proverbs itself, and then within the larger context of wisdom literature of Ketuvim within the Hebrew Bible. And I think we're starting to see a pattern that's emerging here, which is very different than the one that we become used to, that is more prevalent in the medieval period. So Bev was waiting.
Just an observation and then a question. From verse 5 to 24, you have the very explicit, this is the shot, the very explicit fall from grace. This is what happens. You go one step at a time and you become ensnared. So my question is, my observation is, it seems very detailed for a chapter. It doesn't let off. And then my question would be.
And where does it end, Bev?
Pardon? It ends
where
about
does it
24.
End? In 27, where does it lead to? Sheol and Mavet.
It ends in 23, is the last one.
23 is the last, and then it says, now therefore my children hearken, etc. So my question is, why so explicit, every detail of falling from grace? Why is it emphasized here in such great detail?
Well, aside from what I've already shared, I'm not sure I can give you any further insight, but there's just a deep and abiding anxiety. And that, remember, we saw earlier on in chapter 6 and chapter 3 that wisdom and the project of Torah and Musar, but specifically of Torah, what is Torah called? Eitz chaim hi lamachazikim ba. Okay, so it's a tree of life, as opposed to going into the house of death, right? Going down into the chambers of death. So remember, this takes us back to the original wisdom moment, at least in terms of the chronology of the Hebrew Bible. Where does the original moment take place where we have access to the possibility of wisdom based on a choice? In the book of Genesis?
Garden.
Eve.
Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, and there are two trees.
Right.
You have a choice. Just as Moses had, it's very interesting. There's a parallelism here I didn't reflect on earlier, but there are moments of a choice about the transmission of wisdom. Garden of Eden, two trees. Exodus, Moses, two sets of tablets. And so what was the choice that Adam and Eve should have made if they were true seekers of wisdom and wanted to achieve immortality? Which tree should they have eaten from?
Tree of life.
That's right. Which is what Proverbs calls Torah and wisdom here. So the missed opportunity in Genesis of eating from the tree of life, of being able to take and to receive the wisdom of life, which is what now Proverbs is offering, that is a makeup moment that was missed in Eden. Now, instead, you have an opportunity not to make the same mistake again. And that may be the reason why there was this anxiety, Bev, because we have the shadow and the echoes of what happens in Eden, where instead of eating from the tree of life, of the Eitz HaChaim, what did we eat from?
Tree of knowledge.
That's right, tree of knowledge, good and evil. So it's interesting that Proverbs is suggesting that true wisdom doesn't come from knowledge of good and evil, which sometimes is known as conventional morality, which is one kind of wisdom. But what Proverbs is trying to suggest is that what we really are after here, in a deeper way, is an eternal kind of wisdom. And that's the reason why we're going to see in chapter 8, then there's a shift from the cultivation of the proper character refinement that's necessary to receive wisdom, to what the source of wisdom is itself, which is not conventional morality, but it is actually cosmic wisdom. That's what we're going to go to in chapter 8. So there is a different program and a different agenda, and the anxiety comes from the story that's told in both Genesis with the Garden of Eden, the two trees, Exodus with the two tablets. We have another chance now to get it right and to ensure that we don't make the wrong choice. The wisdom teacher has all that anxiety that's been building up, right? If we're reading the Bible chronologically like that. Elisa.
I want to suggest one thing that occurred to me in response to Bev's question about why is it so detailed, and so at that point it becomes like a story, like it's drawing us into the narrative. It's being very graphic and specific about the details and the smells and using our senses and all those other things. And I wonder if it's a way for the author to acknowledge the appeal, the visceral and physical appeal of this other path. And this sort of takes me back to what we were talking about a little while ago. It occurred to me that, you know, that this, the text reveals an understanding, or at least a perspective on the nature of the human being, that this other woman is so compelling to human beings. And so by acknowledging the the graphic, and by putting in the graphic nature narrative of the story, it's like a way of saying, okay, yes, this is very compelling. I understand it's in color. It's on, it's on the big screen, but despite that, you have to veer away from it.
Yeah, I mean, there was no Technicolor. There was no Technicolor way of conveying this. We're talking about scrolls of black and white, and as a result, there was the So Shirley had a comment.
Yeah, I'm going to go one step farther to what you were saying, Elisa. I wonder if the author had been tempted and had gone down that road. And that's why he was able to explain it in such detail, because he had gone down that road and he was seduced, and now is sharing his story about what had happened to him.
It's very possible. Very possible. Okay, any other comments or questions that come up from these sections that we're looking at?
Yes, I have a comment.
Alan?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
If I take your suggestion, guidance that wisdom is feminine, and I take out the adulteress and I superimpose the word alternative ideas, alternative philosophies, alternative ways of thinking, this becomes a scenario of a seduction of a wisdom or a path in life that is contradictory to what Judaism is offering, because you're always referring to Ashteret and as a feminine form of not only a worship, but of a set of values. So
right.
What was going on in the days when Mishle was written that was tempting on an intellectual level or a spiritual level that made it so seductive for Jews?
Well, Alan, it's a very good question, and we're trying to come to terms with what exactly was going on at the time. I did mention this issue of the shift from the agrarian society to a market economy, the fact that there was the anxiety about taxation, as well as the exchange of coins, and just the rapid rate and the high risk of investment and return, as well as the anxiety around loaning money. All these things begin to become part of the market economy and the way that the mind thinks within a market economy. So there was a lot of concern that we also see, for example, if we compare this to the book of Kohelet. Kohelet is another wisdom text that we could look at within the general environs of these challenges of the shift from the agrarian society to a market economy, and to understand that there also was an increase in terms with taxation. There was an increase of governmental bureaucracy, and there was a concern that one becomes, for example, in the book of Kohelet in Ecclesiastes, one becomes sort of caught in this bureaucratic trap that for moderns, we might look at this through the eyes of Franz Kafka, right? Kafka, I think, captures the nightmare of bureaucracy that emerges in a book like The Trial that is worthwhile reading, to see how the modern anxiety is similar to the ancient anxiety in terms of the sense of distance, the loss of intimacy, of relationships, all these things that happen that we sort of take for granted because we're so far removed from an agrarian society. But that shift from the agrarian world and economy to a market economy where things become more abstract, where you can pay for a service or you can do something with money that you couldn't do where you were trading from the goods and the fruits of the field, it it leads to a shift in terms of also the way people are thinking. And I think the alternative ways of thinking that emerge are are equally abstract and disconnected. Um, Primarily, I think, because of this shift in economy, and that also affects the way that that people are able to understand their relationship to God. There's no longer, in as there was in the agrarian society in a polytheistic culture, a way of being able to evoke the powers of the gods for each domain of my life. Right? I could go to this cult and make this offering for my field, for the god of the field. I could go to this cult and make this offering, for the god of the river, for the god of the sky, whatever it is. I had different addresses in which I could make these offerings in a society that was wired that way. And then suddenly you shift to a market economy, and all those things disappear. They no longer have the same power. And so one of the things I think that they're struggling with, and the anxiety that we keep feeling here, is what is it that ties us to some kind of a moral compass in an age where it's a shift really that happens in the Bible in general, from the time of the prophets onwards, where Karl Jaspers calls it the axial age. That there's something that's happening. You see it not just in Judaism, you see it in Chinese philosophy, you see it in many different tribal communities, where there's a shift to more abstract thinking, and a way of navigating the world that we now call wisdom. And the possibility that wisdom, this project of wisdom, could go awry is terrifying, because that alternative way, and it still hasn't been fully articulated, but the anxiety of going to the dark side is there. I mean, that's the reason why we've spoken about it before. Although this story is a perennial story in many religious traditions, and here it symbolizes the feminine. It's also really the binary of darkness and light, right? So that when we see, for example, during the Second Temple period, much later on, an example that becomes very exacerbated, is that within the Jewish communities of learning and reading and of teaching themselves, there is a split between those who see themselves as the children or the disciples of light and the children of darkness, right? And that becomes really exacerbated in the time of the Second Temple period with Qumran. So if you look at the way that the Qumran community was reading all these biblical texts, their concern was to create a pristine and uncontaminated society of discipleship based on the transmission of purified wisdom to people that are purified to receive the wisdom. And they are the children of light. And that's the reason why they left Jerusalem, right? This was the Essenes. They leave Jerusalem because they're critical of, again, this is much later than the wisdom text we're looking at, but it's the same critical concern that pulls the Jewish community apart. What they're concerned about is the corruption of wisdom, of alternative ways of thinking, exactly as you're saying, Alan, that we see in two different communal structures within Judaism. So the Essenes were competing for power and for transmission of wisdom with the Sadducees and the Pharisees. So the Sadducees had an alternative way of transmitting the power of God to the people, which is supposed to be a source of wisdom and guidance. The Sadducees were the ones who said you reach God and the ultimate source of your moral compass in the world through the offering of sacrifices in the temple in Jerusalem. One address, one vehicle, and one system through the priests and through the priestly culture of the Sadducees. On the other hand, you have the emergence of the Pharisees that become the rabbinic class, who say that it's not according to the singular address of what the Sadducees are suggesting, but we actually learn Torah and teach Torah, and it's possible to sit in fellowship groups. And as long as you make sure, for example, that you're washing your hands and you're taking a more minimalist approach to the laws of purity, which the Sadducees were totally obsessed with, and the Essenes were even more obsessed with. That's the reason why they left Jerusalem. They felt like things from a ritual perspective were too contaminated, so they left Jerusalem, because they felt that they were being too contaminated by the environment. So they leave to go and hide in these caves and transmit wisdom. And so you have this, that's an example much later on of at least 3 or 4. And then you have the zealots who are circulating around at the same time and say, actually, the source of wisdom is through liberation politics, right? That we're going to go and liberate ourselves from persecution of the Roman edicts because we want to take it one step further than the rabbinic Pharisees do. We feel that not only should we be teaching Torah at all costs, but we should be waging war against the imperialist domination of the Romans. And they all, that's just one window into much later a period in Judaism where you see 4 different approaches to what we would call in general wisdom, or having some kind of a compass to guide your life. But these are all emerging because we're no longer necessarily, I would suggest, we're no longer necessarily in an agrarian society, and the mindset that comes with living and working the land in that way has moved on. So we need to go back. I would suggest, Alan, if you're interested in this, is to look at Karl Jaspers and his work called The Axial Age. And I'll try to bring some of that together. If it also, I welcome you to look at it and see what you can discover from it. But I think that's also pointing to something not just within Judaism and within the ancient Near East, but it's also the Far East as well, and the zeitgeist of the human mind at this time. There's something going on within the human species that is leading to these new kinds of anxieties for alternative ways of seeing the world and thinking that Judaism cannot escape. So we're not unique in terms of dealing with these problems, but we may use symbolism, for example, of the feminine or of woman wisdom in a particular way, but you're going to see it also in other religious cultures and other philosophies of the time. So that's why it's important. It's really, I think the questions that you're raising are much larger questions than the specific text, but it may help us try to understand, because it's so difficult to get a real sense of the exact carbon 14 dating of this text. We're trying the best we can, but when we drill down deeper into these images, you can see I can take it much earlier and I can also take it much later. But that's the genius of the text, but it's also the challenge that we're left with, is that it's hard to really to fix it at a specific date. We can try and speculate, but the questions of wisdom are perennial, and the ways that the authorship is trying to create a curriculum are somewhat contextual, but also perennial. So it's a big open question that we have to think more about. And I think that what you've raised, though, is this larger tipping point within the evolution of the ancient Israelite mind that would be worthwhile for us to consider in relationship to this larger shift within civilizations called the shift of the axial age, and to see if that helps us understand the anxiety of living in a world that's more bureaucratic, that's more focused on the exchange of money, which leads to the exchange of ideas, and more distant from what used to be an imminent and proximate experience of God in our lives. Now suddenly God is transcendent and God is removed from the everyday experience of our lives. How do we recapture that? And wisdom literature in the Bible is obsessed with this question. They're obsessed with this question because primarily what happens when you suffer, that's when the rubber hits the road, right? If I'm a righteous person doing righteous things in the world, then why do I suffer? Is another version of the same question, which is if I'm trying to cultivate wisdom and I go astray, I have anxiety, because if I don't have that wisdom, then when I suffer, I'm going to be lost. So it's a life and death kind of engagement with wisdom, because I know that I need this in order to be able to overcome suffering, which we spoke of before. That's the whole book of Job, and that is the question of theodicy. All these texts in the wisdom canon are trying to do what anthropologist Clifford Geertz calls the purpose of religion, which is to create order out of chaos. And they're living in chaotic times. And the anxiety comes from the chaos of not having the same structure that we once had in an agrarian world, where if I am good, then there is rain that falls on my crops. And if I am evil, then I will be punished with drought. And that kind of calculus no longer works. And as a result, we are left in a world bereft of meaning, and the wisdom texts are each an experiment with a project to try to share with us a way of reinstating some kind of a mooring, so that we can have an anchor in a world where we feel lost in the chaos of uncertainty. That's kind of where I think we are with the axial age, and that's the reason why wisdom is becoming more and more abstract. But we'll see. You'll come back and you'll tell me what you think after we think about it for a week, and then we'll take a look next week together at chapter 8 and try to understand the relationship between these two chapters. Why are we moving from this extremely polemical language about character development and about betrayal? And how does character development and character refinement allow us to shift from character refinement to cosmic cosmic consciousness, which I think is what is going to happen when we reach chapter 8.